Anne has very effectively covered the gist of my talk, so I'm not sure that I should go forward with it. I mean, it was a nice story you led off with. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you to the Clinton School for inviting me, and thank you. Tell you right off the bat that I have a former student in the room, so Erica Swallow, right, who took one of my courses at Sloan, what was it, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? 1 year ago, right? So leadership stories. We've got a ringer in the room. If there are any questions, Erica has all the answers. Why talk about story? I think Anne has given a pretty good indication of where I'm going to go with this topic. That is, what organizations gain from the use of story. But there's something that you didn't mention and that I think is worth mentioning here, and that is that we've always told stories, right? And that when you think about leadership, and there are all kinds of theories of leadership, there's leadership, there's X, there's Y, there's U, transformational leadership, transactional leadership. I mean, the list is long. And these are all good theories, and in many ways, each of them covers some very, and sometimes many, very specific aspects of leadership. But we have always told stories, not just the people we think of as leaders, but all of us. We tell them day in, day out, right? At the water cooler, you want to tell us what you were doing yesterday when we should have been meeting for lunch, right? You weren't there. Or what you plan to do tomorrow, what you hope your startup will accomplish. I mean, we do it all the time. And when I say we, I mean all of us, even those of you in the room, and I sometimes include myself in that list, who think you can't tell a good story. I mean, we all do it. And the people who do it best acquire a certain influence, and the people who hear those stories best acquire a certain influence. So the emphasis on the good story here goes to that. Some stories are better than others. Some people tell their stories better than others. And of course, there's the other piece of this. So if I say to you, so I was talking with, I don't know, what's your name? I was talking to Meryl yesterday, and she told me X, Y, and Z. That's a good story. If I said it that way, how would you read what I just said? Likely not true. Sorry, Meryl, this has nothing to do with you, right? So the phrase, the good story, comes complete with the ethical challenge. That is, sometimes people tell really good stories that a lot of people get invested in because it sounds right, and it's a lie. Right, so it's there in the title, right? But we've got a challenge here. And I'm hoping as we go through, and I've got a short agenda for you, I hope. Right, so what is the good story? And I want to talk about some frameworks which will help us to see how you can begin at least to test for truth, which is important. The teller and the told, and here I would take you back to the title. So the inspiring leadership is both leadership that is inspiring, that is, or inspirational, but also that a story well told inspires people in the audience to become leaders or to exercise leadership. So it is both the person telling the story and the person hearing, or the persons hearing the stories, who might, as an expression of a response to the story they've heard, step up to a leadership challenge. It works both ways. So the teller and the told, leadership through story. I'll talk a bit more about exactly how this plays out, and then we'll have a discussion. I am told that I have the tradition here is the speaker gets to speak for about half an hour, and then you get to grill him or her for half an hour. So I'll abide by that, I hope. All right, so what is a good story? And I did this, frankly, because it seemed to me a stellar example, whether I came to the Clinton School to tell it or someplace else. But class day, Harvard, June 6, 2007, storyteller is William Jefferson Clinton, after whom this Central Library is named. The predecessors in that role, so class day speaker, include the first of those, 1968, was Coretta Scott King. And she actually stood in for Martin Luther King Jr., who had been assassinated before he actually delivered on the invitation to come and give the class day speech. Others, Arthur Miller, Mother Teresa, Bono, and many, many others of equal status. And the theme, as it evolved from President Clinton's address, was our common humanity. That is what we have in common. And you can see the speech on YouTube. It's available. It's about half an hour long. It's very powerful. It's part of the reason I chose it. I mean, he is, and I was actually sitting on stage behind him, which is a much more comfortable place to be than, being at the podium. Nevertheless, so I sat there as he gave this speech and marveled at the fluency of what he did. That he could talk about inequality in the human genome and sustainability, and he had all the numbers at his fingertips, and he walked us through numbers that made the case that he wanted to make as he moved towards this theme of our common humanity. And then very late in the speech, I think it was 23 or 24 minutes in, he told this story about going to Aceh, so in Indonesia, on the island of Sumatra, that had suffered horrific losses as a result of the earthquake-generated tsunami in 2004, right? And this is what it came down to. The most beautiful boy I ever saw in my life. So he had gone to the health clinic in the refugee camp and noticed this boy, and so he made that comment apparently out loud, and the woman who was with the boy said, yes, and until yesterday he had 9 siblings, and they're all gone. And then President Clinton said, and so then I took a 2-hour tour of the camp, the refugee center, and the person who took me around was the boy's father, who was also, of course, the father of the other 9 siblings who had disappeared as a result of the cataclysm. And he said the guide, the father, never made any reference to his own suffering and his own loss. And that, I think, more than anything, that one story, and it was, I don't know, maybe a couple of minutes out of the 30 minutes for the speech as a whole, I think what the president did then was to anchor all of those numbers, which showed his expertise, showed his broad understanding of the way the world works, but anchored it in the individual, in Merrill, who tells a story which I might or might not believe, right? And that seems to me fundamental, to be able to do that, to have the broad knowledge, the expertise, to talk knowledgeably about the state of the world in order to make a point, and at the same time not to lose sight of the fact that we're talking about people, and that it comes down to individuals or small communities, maybe large communities, but even the large communities are still made up of individuals. So this would be your friend, your classmate, right, who made certain choices in order to achieve her ends. I mean, you've given us a sort of career trajectory there, but also an expression of character. And that's fundamental. That's what it takes, I think, to tell a good story. And the people who do it well and who test for truth wind up being good leaders. And I'm not even sure here, honestly, this may be a chicken and egg thing, which comes first, that you have the character that allows you to be a good leader, and therefore you figure out how to tell good stories, or vice versa. I think it's both. So here, another example, and of course this does also have a connection to President Clinton, but this only goes to show how complicated the issue of storytelling really is. So time and place, post-genocide Rwanda, the stories, and so here Erica can testify. In the course that we did together, we do 2 classes, so a full module on the genocide, the first of which we see the film that was made of Paul Rusesabagina's life during I don't know how many of you have seen Hotel Rwanda, but the story of how he managed to save 1,268 moderate Hutu and Tutsi refugees during the genocide. Very powerful film. So that film, but this autobiography which he wrote, which substantially makes the same claims about what happened during the genocide and how he dealt with the challenge of saving these people. Then Romeo Dallaire, who was the UN force commander in Rwanda during the genocide, Shake Hands with the Devil, The Failure of Humanity in Rwanda, which he published in 2004, so 10 years after the genocide. And finally, E.O. Wilson, who's an entomologist, right, the creator of the movement known as sociobiology, he's a professor at Harvard, who wrote a book. He's written many books, but this one, Consilience, the Unity of Knowledge, in which he talks about how bringing all of the fields of knowledge together should be possible and will benefit us in a whole host of ways, which he describes. I think it's very still biology-based. That's where he places the root of our common endeavor. But nevertheless, and he has 2 or 3 paragraphs in Consilience on the genocide. And what he argues is that the population in Rwanda from the late 50s into the early 90s grew exponentially because of better health care, and that as a result, the country was drawing down its water supply, and because of the inheritance for a larger population, plots were getting smaller, so agricultural production was dropping. And that effectively the genocide happened, certainly because of ethnic tension, but also because of failed carrying capacity. So for those of you who think about sustainability and climate change, you will know what I'm talking about. And Wilson's argument is there were simply too many people. And that whether you were Hutu or Tutsi, the problem remained the same, inadequate resources. And so at a perhaps subconscious level, and he says it, the young men of Rwanda helped solve the problem by reducing headcount. That is not an interpretation that makes a lot of people comfortable, right? And we had those discussions in class. The question of really, is this what it means to be part of a society? The important thing here is, and we could have this discussion here, but you line these 3 texts up side by side. Rusesabagina is unambiguous in both the film, well, I think it's implicit in the film, but in the autobiography, he says, I'm a hotel manager. That's what I do. And when I saved 1,268 moderate Hutu and Tutsi in the hotel, I was simply doing my job. So it's about professional values. You also get the sense that his personal values took him there, right? So whether he was a hotel manager or something else, this was something he believed he needed to do. Dallaire is all about the organization. The man he was as I say, the UN force commander in Rwanda during that period. So he was the UN. And at the same time, for the UN, he represented all of the countries that had some stake in seeing peace in Rwanda and a cessation of the hostilities. And his frustration, of course, was that he couldn't make it happen. And he says that. He's unambiguous. But so for him, the concern is certainly for him personally, but more, how did we get to this place where these organizations, nation states, and the UN itself couldn't stop what was happening? And then we have Wilson, who's working at a systems level. This is the way nature works. This is what it means to be human. This is what people do under certain circumstances. And if we want to address this kind of an issue, we're going to have to think about who we are and what we do at that level. So look at that and then say, and of course, again, President Clinton was confronted with this. So what is it? Genocide, acts of genocide, do we intervene? Who's we? Is it the UN? Is it the United States? Is it the French? Is it the Belgians? Is it a coalition, right? And it didn't happen. And I think we need to ask ourselves, and I'm sure that people in the administration at the time asked themselves, how do we make this all work? How do we align all of these values? How do you think system and think organization and think personal or professional ethics and bring it all together so that you come up with a satisfying solution, right? And so here, just brief quotes from the 3. Rusesabagina, and I think this reveals the personal backdrop here, life as it ought to be lived. He is at least paraphrasing C.S. Lewis as a Christian thinker and Christian writer, right? And Rusesabagina himself invokes the Bible late in this chapter. So that too is fundamental here. Life as it ought to be lived, and then Dallaire near the end of the failure of humanity in Rwanda, so the good of humanity, but the good of our own tribe, and Wilson driven by environmental change, that is what brought Rwanda to where it was. The three of them, I think, align around the idea that we can do something for what the president called our common humanity. The question is, practically, how do you do that? But you've got these three stories, and then the challenge, I think, for us, and it wasn't just for the administration, but for any one of us, is how do you put this together and craft the narrative that allows you to intervene in a way that prevents any more harm than has already been done? That's a leadership challenge. And finding the flow that unites at this level the issues that are involved is what makes people look like, act like, and actually be leaders. And it's not easy. So there's that. But then there's something else. And I would say that President Clinton, in his class day speech at Harvard, did say, yeah, actually, I get it about differences and why we value differences. He said, genetically, we are 99.9% alike, right? That's what we share. And he said, there is this other 1/10 of 1%, and we seem, for reasons that are not entirely clear to me, and I think, here, this is 2007, so more than a decade after Rwanda, but as president, he had seen innumerable conflicts and had to weigh step by step how the United States should react to each and every one of those, right? And every president does the same thing. That seems to be part of the role. But, so for him, the concern about conflict was real and present and constant. And I think his emphasis on our common humanity was an attempt to deal with that. But there is also this question of what's the value of difference when we talk about diversity, right? And it's a term that comes up all the time in conversations about ethnic relations and so on. I mean, this is fundamental to what it means to be an American. We're a very diverse population, and we talk a lot about that diversity. And I think we believe that we need to, will benefit from honoring that diversity. Right? And that is, so when we talk about difference, some of it goes there. I don't think we can walk away from it, and I don't think we should. So another perspective, the perspective of someone who is other, who is different, right? Highlights our circumstances. This is the way the world looks from outside the norm. Our uniqueness, we are in fact unique genetically, individually, in spite of the 99.9% that we share with everyone else. And that's not a bad thing. Maybe it's a good thing. Our imagination, that is, how do we think of ourselves as like and different from everyone else? Maybe it's tied to teenage years. I don't know. Teenagers like to think of themselves as outliers, right? Always. I did. And our aspirations. We don't want just to do what everyone else is doing. That's a reality. And again, I would say it's probably a good thing. But having had all of that, if we are consistent with that commitment to our otherness, then we have to recognize that other people are other too. And that they need to be honored because, like us, they are different. And we need to understand what that difference is if we are going to pay them the kind of respect, the respect that they deserve. Because that's what we want for ourselves, even as we say we are different. Now, there's this, and it takes us to the connection of difference to story. So this is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She's a Nigerian writer. She's publishing now, so she's, I don't know, maybe in her late 30s. This is a TED Talk that she gave in, I think, 2009. When we reject the single story, when we realize that there is never a single story about any place, we regain a kind of paradise. She's actually working here with something that Alice Walker said, so the American novelist, right? But so the emphasis on paradise, of course, it seems to me is fundamental here. She talks about her as a girl reading books about English children, and she wrote. But in Nigeria, she was writing about kids eating apples and playing in the snow. She didn't have apples, she didn't have snow. And after a while, as she tells it, she figured out that she could write stories about people like her, like herself, right? And with different fruit and no snow and other kinds of weather, right? And so for her, that was the big discovery, and I think she has made a very successful and interesting career out of recognizing that difference. The important thing here, and again, I come back to that last phrase, we regain a kind of paradise. That paradise is the wealth that comes from difference and the recognition that there are so many different ways to be in the world. And that you can capture by telling the good story, by recognizing, certainly this is her formula, recognizing what it means to be a Nigerian writer, a girl, or a man, depends on man or woman, but recognizing that uniqueness and cherishing it and incorporating it in the story that you tell and setting it side by side with stories from people who are telling very different stories about themselves. So this seems to me a fundamental defense, if indeed we think that difference needs defending, fundamental defense of difference. And so how do we balance that difference against our common humanity, which my guess is everyone in this room agrees is something we should cherish? How do you make that happen? So here are two other, and this is, I remember I mentioned to you I was going to focus both on the storyteller and the audience. Here are two other stories that I think illustrate the challenge of connecting, combining difference and our common humanity. And so, Erica, this is a new edition. This was not in the reading list when we did our course together. Laura Poitras's direct Citizen Force, the film about Edward Snowden. It's a documentary. I don't know how many of you have seen it, right? But it starts in his hotel room in Hong Kong. This is after he has left Hawaii and is hiding to avoid incarceration. And she starts there and follows him over a period of time. When we did this film in the course that Eric and I shared a year earlier, I had a student group teach the film, and they staged it as a debate. They split the class in half, and they said half of you are going to treat Snowden as a traitor, and the other half are going to treat him as a patriot. And we're going to have the debate. And then, so we had the debate in the last, I don't remember, 15, 20 minutes. And then we came back together and talked about how you resolve the issue of the status of someone like Snowden, given the leaks of which he was the source, right? And the question of how what he did relates to what we think of as making you a good American or a good citizen, period. So you've got here someone who I think embraced a set of values, but found those values taking him to an action that many people find deeply problematic. The film won an Academy Award. It captures, I think, this complex of issues, and they are ethical issues, right? And for all of us, the told here with the audiences, I think the question has to be, so where do we stand on someone like Snowden and what he did? How do we want to evaluate him and recognize that how we evaluate what he did may also determine what we do, what we feel is necessary, what it looks like to be socially conscious. And then the other, second one, and we did this together, and I actually have a chapter on it in one of the books that Anne mentioned earlier, so Story of Success. Du Bois-Hayward, and who here has read The Country Bunny and the Little Gold Shoes? So, thank you, Erica. I am here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, this is a classic of American literature. You should read it. It would take you 20 minutes. It is, so Du Bois-Hayward, South Carolinian, descendant of one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, wrote Porgy which his wife then turned into a play, which then became Porgy and Bess when Hayward worked with the Gershwin brothers to create that piece, which itself is a classic of American art, right? The Country Bunny in Little Gold Shoes, he wrote, published in 1939 for his only child, his daughter Jennifer. It's a story of, well, actually, Erica, why don't you tell us, what is it?
It's a story of a working class bunny and her children, and we go through her journey as she's left behind her dreams of being this very special Easter bunny, this like very high-held office of Easter bunny, to raise her family. But by the end of the book, I think the story has changed, and through being a mother bunny, she's gained the sort of skills that would allow her to, or would enable her to be the perfect Easter bunny, although everybody else thought, what, you're just a mother bunny, how would you be this special Easter bunny?
Thank you. That's a good summary. Right. So this is the country bunny. The working class thing is, right, she comes from the country. She's also brown, and she's a girl. And all the other bunnies. So in this version of the world, there are 5 Easter bunnies, and every bunny wants to be an Easter bunny. And the little girl bunny, the country bunny, wants to be one of the Easter bunnies. And everyone says, sorry, you don't have the qualifications. I mean, this is the glass ceiling, right? Unambiguously, 1939, and race factors into it, and as you indicated, you know, so social inequality, I mean, it's all there, right? And then she organizes, so Erica left out this crucial line, right? The mother bunny, she has 21 baby bunnies, the husband, we never see him, right? Right, so anyway, he disappears. And as her kids move out of toddlerdom and into sort of young childhood, she says, now we're going to have some fun. And she has 2 of them do the sweeping, and 2 of them do the dishes, and 2 of them garden, right? So she organizes the household, and basically the kids wind up running the show, right? But they're still running the show under her direction. And then she has the time to go off and be one of the Easter bunnies. So the ethical issue here, of course, is, so did she do this to the kids because she wanted to go off and pursue her career? Or did she do it because it's just good household management? You know, anyone who comes from a big family, what do? You take the older kids, and the older kids manage the younger kids, and the parents survive. Because if they didn't have, you know, sort of juvenile management, the house would go to rack and ruin. So anyway, that's the story. The important thing here is that, and I gave some indication of this, when we have this conversation in the classroom, people are all over the map on what the virtue of the mother cottontail. Is she good? Is she bad? Did she abuse? Did she exploit her kids? Or is she just teaching them how to be good kids? This is a simple book. This is a book designed for 5 to 10-year-olds, right? And here we have full-fledged adults who can't agree on what's going on in the story, because they do, and we all do this with stories, right? We read ourselves into them, we appropriate them, we share them, we reject them, and the good ones come back to challenge us, to haunt us, because we never quite have the answer. And we know, based on a conversation that you and I had, that we're just in very different places on the virtue of the mother cottontail. And that's a good thing, because it keeps us alert and makes us challenge ourselves, makes us challenge one another. So it makes the community that shares the story come alive. That's a good story. And that's how it's not just President Clinton who uses stories well and is a real leader, but also each of us individually, if we are willing to go this route, right? That it gives us the power. It keeps us alert intellectually and emotionally, and gives us the power to step up, either when we're needed or when we feel that we have something to contribute. There's this quote so this is Oliver Wendell Holmes. There seems to be some uncertainty about whether it was Junior, who was a Supreme Court justice, or Senior, his father, who was a physician and writer, well-known part of the Boston scene back in the 19th century. I would not give a fig for the simplicity this side of complexity, but I would give my life for the simplicity on the other side of complexity. A good story is a story that takes that complexity and helps you realize how complex a situation is, and then says, and yet, there are these people, and there's this event, this challenge that they meet. So the story brings it down to something that we can all readily understand. That seems to me fundamental, that you can exercise, and again, it is a huge challenge to make it happen, but that you can take complexity, not because you are ignorant, but because you know so much, and fold it into a package that people use on, and I said this at the beginning, it's the water cooler. It's why weren't you where we were supposed to meet yesterday? It is, this is my career path, but you don't have to live my entire career to understand how I'm getting there. That's what the good story is about. And that's all I have to say, and I'm happy to talk.
Thank you, Leigh. We do have time for some questions, so raise your hand and we'll start the grilling. Yes, Annie.
I had to make a decision whether I would come and have the opportunity to hear what you had to say, or to go hear a story that I know over at the Military Museum about the Tuskegee Flyers. And I know the man that they're all about here in Arkansas. And I came to figure out, because Skip, I don't know where he is, keeps saying that I need to write my books on the many stories that I tell here that people know as an oral historian or a guru. And I was trying to figure, as you were teaching, what a good story is. Is every book a good story? And if not, why? Are they famous on my good reading list, the New York Times list? What's the difference?
Tricky question. Over the centuries, a lot of books that have registered fully with the public at the time of their publication have been forgotten. And any number of books that didn't register with the public at their time of publication now seem to have been classics forever. And I think we can reasonably ask ourselves why. My answer would be that the ones that surface over, that live, that continue to resonate, and these are the classics, right? Do so because they tap into something like this constellation of qualities that I've described. And I don't think you have consciously to say to yourself, the world is complex and I'm going to simplify it. I think some people do it well, naturally, and I think some people do it well because they work really, really hard at it and they blow it half a dozen times and then they finally get it right. I mean, I wonder about this with just about any art form. Popular music, why is it that some songs capture everyone, right? I don't know how many of you watched the Grammys the other night, right? But what is it about B.B. King singing "The Thrill Is Gone" that made them decide that that was the number they were going to play in the tribute for him? Everyone knows, everyone who listens to blues, who listens to B.B. King, knows that song. It's not even his song, right? It's Willie Dixon, I think, right? But he did it. He's the one who made that song into the lasting hit that it has become. Why is that? If I knew, I would become B.B. King in a minute, right? But, and so we can play this out across the arts, right? There are plays, there are novels, et cetera, that just seem to resonate with large numbers of people. I don't think it's just that some people are naturally great novelists, although that's true too. I think you can work at it. Maybe you have to work at it. But so I would say, have I answered your question? Probably not.
Yes and no. Alan Ward has written several books. Your latest book, I believe, Oh, I'm sorry. I know better. Forgive me. They call me the Helen Thomas over here. I know better. Alan's stories and his books, the last one that he wrote, I've shared it with several people. And when you read that book, I don't think you'll ever be the same as it relates to this thing we call diversity, this thing about the human family. He captures it in such a way that it's something that you can't explain.
Is this you?
No, that's him.
Sorry,
Right.
sorry.
Alan, hold your hand up.
So can you tell us, Alan, what you do that makes this magic?
It's just the story.
It's not just the story. No one believes you. Even I don't believe you. It's not just the story. What is it you're doing?
Relating what is universal in all of us, because every story includes, I feel, all of us in something we've been through that's like what the story is about. And it's that sense of universality that makes us all one human family.
So you believe in our common humanity.
Indeed.
How do you feel about difference?
Well, that adds richness to the similarities. And thereby we can learn what the differences are, and then find those differences already existing potentially within ourselves, and thus develop those qualities ourselves so we can enrich each other by sharing our common universal story and then learning from it.
Okay, good, thank you.
It's the expert that I think that you just try to teach all of us.
Any other questions?
Just a comment. It seems to me like every story that is based on truth is a good story. Stories that are based on lies are not good stories. And I think an example would be Adolf Hitler, whose philosophy was that if you tell a lie long enough, it would eventually become the truth. Just a comment.
Right, so what do you do with the idea of a higher truth? That is, that you can tell a story that has no basis in fact, but that takes us to a place where we recognize the kind of universals that you discussed. How do you feel about that?
How do you define truth?
Truth is the universals. Is it Alan? I'm sorry, is that your name? Yeah, so that Alan invoked, and the differences that enrich. It's both. So you have to find your way there. I mean, President Clinton had the advantage in his speech of being able to refer to the Human Genome Project, right? So he had the science, so he could say unambiguously, we are 99.9% alike, right? And it's there, we're coded for that. I don't know that you're working with that number. I think you believe that we all share a vast, reservoir of impulses and inclinations and qualities, and maybe not so good qualities, so, right? Vices instead of virtues. And that if you tap into that, you get the good story. So that's a truth. And I mean, I hesitate to go here, that since you've invoked Hitler, was his message unambiguously untrue about what the German people needed? Why did they buy into it?
Get back to Ann. About marketing. That's how marketeers sell products. They keep telling the story, and repetition builds memory.
Yeah, so the repetition is important. I'm looking for, is there a kernel of truth here? Was the German people in a really bad place after World War I?
Yes.
did they need someone or some group? I mean, they had a republic. It didn't work very well, right? I mean, but they wanted to be in a different and better place. And so within limits, he responded to that. I mean, he had his own agenda, maybe conscious or unconscious, I don't know. But that there was something there. And that's, I'm not even sure that it's black and white. Either you're telling the truth or you're telling a lie. But so the political, right? So when you make a statement during a campaign, is it all just flat out lies, or is some of it lies and some of it's truth and some of it's partial truth? And you want, to the extent possible, I think certainly all of us, maybe I should speak for myself here, would I like to see a campaign that is nothing but total truth? Absolutely. Do I think it's likely? No. Right? Yeah.
Thank you for your time tonight.
My pleasure.
I actually would like to get your advice because in a week I'm sitting on a panel and around education, and the purpose of the panel is to discuss how storytelling can be used to just sort of diffuse the controversial discourse around education reform. And so the audience are going to be teachers and administrators and public leaders. So how would you advise that audience on the power of storytelling we even see it here in Little Rock, but around the country, just when we start talking about education reform, it's a very confrontational environment.
Right. I think that, and Nikolai and I were talking about this earlier, that the place of the liberal arts in education in America, the truth is, of course, that even if you devoted yourself exclusively to STEM, you would still tell stories, right? I don't care how hard your science, how devoted an engineer you are still telling stories about the work that you do. And the liberal arts, to the extent that it includes the humanities and the social sciences and what we regard as hard science, across the board helps people, and I think this is true over centuries, helps people to recognize that they need to bring together what we think of as logic and reason and emotions. That is what it means to be human. And the liberal arts, and I recognize that there's a whole class construct behind it, right? But that in spite of that, it captures something about who we are regardless of our practices. And education, in our educational system, we have an obligation, I think we owe it to ourselves and to our children, to ensure that they recognize that they have both the power to tell the story and that they need to challenge the stories once they have learned them. So I don't think you can ever walk away from the storytelling process. It's not like there's the country bunny over here, and there's the scientific revolutions over here. In both cases, the structure of scientific revolutions, the Thomas Kuhn book, right? In both cases, we're building an explanation for who we are and what we do. And so you want to make sure that that's part of the educational process and that it happens very early. I mean, I don't know how many people, most of us as parents, I think, and maybe you're not one, but the kids' books are good books. They're good books because they help kids to understand very early on that this is how we think of ourselves and this is how we learn from one another. I mean, are you a parent? No. Did your parents read stories to you when you were a kid? And what do you think? Why do you think they did that?
Wow, I just want to make sure. I have a sudden feeling that my mom's standing behind me.
You should be very careful what you say then.
Well, I think I have a closer perspective on friends and family that are new parents now, and I get to engage in those conversations. And from what I hear, from my understanding, is a lot of them will do things because they feel like they're supposed to do things. And then, of course, I think that drives it as well. But I mean, but towards my question, I think leadership is about change, and storytelling is this powerful tool. And when you get into something as complicated as public education, there are so many different elements, and the decision-making process is difficult. And so how could even a teacher or a parent that's actively involved, use stories to affect change?
I guess that's one of the reasons I use the Country Bunny both tonight and in this course. That is, I wanted the people in the room to understand that we use story very early. I mean, if you read the Country Bunny, or your parents read you the Country Bunny when you're 5 years old, and I often juxtapose it to a chapter from another book, which some of you may know, Cheaper by the Dozen. So the Gilbreth family, right? So they had 12 kids, and by comparison with the Country Bunny, they apply a very democratic process. I mean, both parents were, so they did time motion studies. They were consultants. The wife, Lillian Muller Gilbreth, had done work in psychology and the psychology of work. They were key players in the way this country thought about organizational behavior and how to improve what happened on assembly lines, for example. But that book, who read that book? I mean, yeah, sure, some of us adults read it then and read it now, but it was, 10 to 12-year-olds. So when you're reading books about time and motion studies disguised, or the Country Bunny, right, which is about, and I meant it when I said it really is about the glass ceiling. It is about race in America. And you're reading that, in the book, when I first found it, came in a little clear plastic cover with an audio cassette, right? I mean, why do we do that? Because we want our kids to learn. And that is the way we do it most readily. So why would we not do it in the school system?
Last one.
I got what you were doing with race and class, but the universality as it relates to the faith, when we think of all of the faiths, where do we get this story that would help bring about this universality? Because without that, we have holy wars.
Is that a question?
Yes. You taught us how to deal with race, class,
And you want faith too.
and I want faith added.
So, okay. Yeah, so I do think, and I come back to this, when President Clinton focused on our common humanity in this talk, he unambiguously said, conflict seems to be the norm. And those conflicts stem from the three things we mentioned, but also unambiguously from religion, right? From organized religion, maybe in some cases informal faith. And I guess I would say, and this is where Alan's universals come in. If you can find your way, and you usually can, and certainly in any faith that I have spent any time studying towards that universality, right? There are points of connection. You have to find them, and you have to articulate them, which doesn't deny what I think you're suggesting. That is, people have killed a lot of other people in the name of their faith. But whatever that faith, you've also found significant numbers of people, and the historical record is there, that say this is what it means to espouse this faith. It is about humanity. It is about charity, and pick your term. So I think within any faith you might choose to discuss, you're going to find at least two camps. This is it's not, and again, I would say it's not black and white. You get the range of opinion. So if you're worried about the conflict that stems from faith confronting faith, then I think the answer is craft the story that finds the points of connection to the stories from the other faiths. And they're there. You just have to take the time and make the effort to identify them. So you're taking me into really difficult territory here. And I guess that's your reputation, right? So the short answer is that by and large, the settings in which I have taught have maintained a secular framework for the discussions. And I do push on this periodically with students with the MBAs, for example, at Sloan. So we do have conversations. We've even had conversations about the virtues of arranged marriage. I mean, even I sometimes am surprised at where these conversations, because this is a business school after all, right? But honestly, I think I have drawn fairly tight limits on that conversation. And maybe I shouldn't.
Go forth, please.
I will. Thank
Leigh,
you.
well, thank you so much for coming to the
My
Quinn School.
pleasure.
Thank all of you for coming out this evening.